Hey everyone, I'm Amos Gaynes from Moog Music, and I'm here with my colleague Michael Ashton, who's one of the principal software architects of the Moog One, and we're here today to talk about the software architecture and get a little bit deeper into the technology that drives this instrument. My other Moog colleague, Gerrit Bevan, and I gave a talk at the ADC conference last year where the Moog One was still a secret, but we talked about this project that we were working on that used Linux and Juice for the front end of some as yet unknown piece of hardware. That turned out to be the Moog One. However, there is a lot more to tell. That's really just talking about one layer of a very deep system. And so today we wanted to get a little bit more in depth with that and describe some of the underlying technology that we have innovated here and brought together for this very powerful synthesizer. So along with Michael, we're going to nerd out some on tech. I hope you're interested in that. We'll try to occasionally play some sounds, but primarily this is a tech session for people that are interested in knowing more about the internals and the architecture of the Moog One. So we'll take it away. Michael, where should we start?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we can. Maybe we should start at the beginning. I guess we started this project about 4 years ago. At least from my perspective, it actually goes back a little before that. But I came to Moog, and it was an incredible opportunity to work on this on a project like this. You know, it really only comes along once in a lifetime. So I guess the idea behind the architecture was to really take advantage of all the technology that's available nowadays, which you know, was not available when people were making analog synthesizers, say, in the 80s. But a lot of amazing stuff has become available, you know, in this decade, and we really just tried to take advantage of that to make as good a musical instrument as we could. So.
One of the things that we've gotten questions about, for example, is are all of the voices being run from a central processor, or do we have other processors on the voice cards? And in fact, the Moog One uses a sophisticated network of processors. I'm not sure exactly how many in total, Michael could probably say. But so far, we've really only talked about the front-end UI system. And so this is an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about how the voices themselves actually work and how the whole system communicates.
Yeah, so I guess the LAS, I'm sorry.
It's called the Moog One now. The code name was LAS, which stands for Long Awaited Synthesizer. So we still call it LAS internally sometimes.
Some of us still do, yeah. I'll get used to it though. The Moog One is kind of made, as Amos alluded to, in these two halves. Part of it is what you really see in front of you, the control panel with the graphics and the knobs and all of that stuff, and that's being run by a Linux system with Juice running all the user interface code. What that talks to, though, is a synthesizer internally, which you can think of as like a sound module, and it's controlled through a network using actually OSC messages. The whole system is configured using something called Open Sound Control, and that tells the real-time hardware what to do, you know, what sounds it should make and how it should make them. And all of the real-time stuff that happens in the system is done by that underlying layer. And that's the network of processors that you were talking about just now. So the processors that we mostly use below the surface are from a company called Amos, who make a slightly unusual kind of microprocessor that shows up in audio products a lot, and it turned out to be kind of perfect for what we were doing here. And so there's a few XMOSs that sort of are the central control for the entire synthesizer, and those are networked to other XMOS processors, one per voice card, and these each run 2 voices. So through that network, the XMOSs kind of all talk to each other, and then the XMOSs that run the voices actually control the making of the sounds. They control the analog hardware that they're all connected to. So that's kind of our approach to kind of making all of this stuff happen. There's a lot to do in making one of the sounds of the Moog One. And by having a separate processor for each voice, we keep the system quite scalable.
Yeah, so really all of the voices are on a sort of a digital messaging bus. So from the front end, if you if you want to play a note, for example, that request to play a note goes to the voice assigner, which determines is that note supposed to be going to synth 1 or 2 or 3. If that synth is in unison, then how many voices should be playing that note, and all of those type of things. And then, excuse me, as Michael was saying, every 2 voices share an XMOS processor, which generates the real-time control voltages that actually run the analog sound circuits. So envelopes and LFOs are generated digitally at very high precision and high resolution, but ultimately those digital modulators, everything that you hear pretty much is an analog signal. It's analog oscillators, analog mixer, analog filters, all of analog mixing and summing. But the character of those sounds and what those circuits are doing, we're able to control that digitally, using DACs, using digital to analog converters. There's basically, there is a digitally controlled analog mixing console in here. There is, the equivalent of a very high-spec modern audio interface, well, times several, really, in several different contexts. And all of that, so all of that digital technology is in service, ultimately, of creating analog voltages that drive a network of analog synthesizers. That's why the individual parts are called Synth 1, Synth 2, and Synth 3, is that they really are each essentially wholly independent synthesizers that are networked together.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to emphasize. One of the great priorities for designing this instrument was that it should have a completely analog signal path wherever possible, from the oscillators to the outputs. So the only time that really wouldn't happen is if you had a digital insert effect, which is, I think, that's just the way it goes. You have to, if you have an effect, and you have to go in digital, out digital. But if you're not doing that, the instrument is really at pains. The architecture is really designed to have a completely analog signal path from the oscillators through the outputs. And so we used a lot of hardware to make that happen. The instrument really is architected like a mixing console. I think Amos probably remembers the time when I started kind of walking around saying, look, we're not designing a synthesizer here, we're designing a mixing console. What are you talking about, Michael? You're crazy. But that really is, in fact, the design of this synthesizer was inspired by a mixer that one of our marketing people recommended that I buy. And so, of course, I cracked it open and kind of saw how it was being done, and I thought, hey, we can do that here for the LAS as well. So, I'm sorry, the Moog One. So, yeah, it's
LAS in our hearts.
Very much kind of a marriage of the best of analog with the best of digital that's available to us now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing that I had, when we were talking about this beforehand, I wanted to talk about the modulation matrix and how that works, because that's a very interesting example of really closely blending the digital and analog worlds. Because ultimately, what the results that you hear from the mod matrix are changing voltages, and that's, there's anything that we do in code doesn't have an audible effect until it becomes a voltage and influences an analog circuit in one way or another. But in order to have we wanted to have the concept of assigning any source to any destination, and we wanted to be able to do that with as few restrictions as possible. So that if you wanted to add modulations, you could just keep adding modulations as you thought of them until we ran out of resources one way or another, whatever that transpired to mean. And so in order to do that, we really came up with what I think is an entirely novel way of doing modulation in a synthesizer, which Michael was very instrumental in doing. And we call it the expression engine. And essentially, as you go assigning sources to destinations and setting up your modulations in the front end, what that does is it actually compiles mathematical expressions which are then it creates mathematical expressions which are compiled into bytecode on the fly, and there is essentially a whole custom programming language running on the voice cards that is doing the modulations in real time as you set them up. And so Michael, maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously with an instrument like this, there was the desire to have as a flexible a modulation engine as possible. And there's a few different approaches to that, but basically when you want the ultimate in flexibility, you want a programming language. And early on in the project, I was, at the time I was very interested in programming languages for audio like OSC and PD and SuperCollider. And it hit me one day that it might be interesting, or I thought, how cool would it be if we could bring these things into an analog synthesizer somehow? But I thought, well, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of pie in the sky. But the more I thought about it, I thought, hey, let's give this a shot. So that's what we actually wound up doing, and it worked out certainly much better than I expected it to, and it actually wound up in the instrument. So yeah, what we have, you actually write expressions, or the front end does, and they're mathematical expressions. They're like A plus B equals C, and those get compiled and they run on the voice cards, and that's what's doing the modulation in real time.
Yeah, in this case, A might be an LFO signal and B might be a mod wheel.
That's
and
right.
Then C is the destination parameter that you want to modulate.
So this gives you tremendous flexibility. I mean, there's almost, you can do almost anything you want up to the limitations of the CPU. And we've found that the XMOS processors are extremely fast, and they're able to do a lot of stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions that's come in is asking if we've looked at the long-term availability of the chips and components that we're using in terms of serviceability. Are they off the shelf or specialized? There are thousands of components in here which run a range from very basic utilitarian parts that will probably be available until the end of civilization to other components that are made by specific single companies like XMOS. But I would say that nothing in the Moog One is unobtainium. Nothing is on a sort of like last time buy is being phased out. We really did look ahead to make sure that the long-term availability is very good for all of these parts. I would say XMOS is a very healthy company right now. They are, almost every modern sound card or mixer or thing of that nature is relying on their technology right now. They are the best at what they do, and I anticipate that they'll be around for the long term. Generally speaking, yes, this is a brand new instrument, and newly designed and very forward-looking in terms of availability, serviceability of the components. Yeah, there's nothing in the Moog One is relying on 1970s technology or old tech parts in any way.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that among analog polysynths, we probably have the fewest sort of proprietary components.
That's right. Yeah, there
probably
are
the
no
most specialized one in the instrument is the XMOS, and even those are really quite widespread and common in the industry. The synthesis engine itself relies almost exclusively on components that are very much off the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, this was an advantage of doing a discrete implementation of the filters, of the oscillators. Some polyphonic synthesizers, to save money and to achieve consistency between the voices, will use oscillators on a chip or filters on a chip, where a whole synthesizer circuit is boiled down into a single integrated circuit on a die. And that was sort of the creation of those chips was what brought in the first round of polyphonic analog synthesizers, because you could have all of the oscillators in ICs, all of the envelope generators in ICs. And while that was very convenient at the time, it's made those instruments very difficult and expensive to service, because an original Curtis envelope chip, you'll be paying tens of dollars if you're lucky enough to find one, if you need a replacement. And we're not doing that at all. All of those functions are are actually built from their individual component building blocks, and individual transistors and resistors and capacitors are ubiquitous and easy to replace and easy to find if you need to.
Yeah, one of the modern technologies that I alluded to earlier, which we brought into play for this design, is surface mount. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that a little bit, but when somebody is going to pull the back off the instrument and see that it is largely surface mount internally. And I know there's a lot of people out there that prefer through-hole, but...
should we address the through-hole versus surface mount debate? Because...
Maybe we should. I'll just say, and again, I'm probably going to get a little bit flamed for this, but in my opinion, there is no inherent audio advantage to through-hole technology over surface mount. And just in terms of performance and numbers, you will get generally better performance from surface mount technology. And now, in truth, there's really not going to be a great deal of difference in a well-designed.
But the parts are smaller. You can't fit as much mojo in a smaller part.
Yeah.
Mojo occupies volume.
So an interesting thing that you'll find if you take, for instance, a through-hole IC and a surface mount IC, the actual part, the actual electronic part, is the same.
Literally exactly
internally.
the same. It is literally exactly the same silicon wafer in a bigger package or a smaller package.
The difference with the through-hole is there's more wire going from that part to the rest of the circuit. And that can actually be a disadvantage in some cases. There's something called inductance, which increases with long leads, and occasionally that can work to your disadvantage. Now, normally, it's not a big deal either way. But the advantage to surface mount is that typically when you get your circuits physically smaller, with the components closer together, you can often get better performance.
Lower noise, better thermal consistency.
Sometimes, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but the best thing is for us is that the surface mount, the miniaturized stuff, it's faster to build. In some cases, it's actually easier to work on. It's lower cost to manufacture. And it lets us get away from having to use these proprietary ICs that we had to rely on in years past. Here, we're able to kind of do our own thing. We're able to be a lot more creative with the circuits and supply that still at a reasonable value.
Right, but the important thing to me is that the sound of an electronic circuit, it is really 99.99999% down to the design of that circuit. And the circuit designer that's wanting to make a certain sound, there's not, the degree of subtle magic that is supposed to exist in carbon resistors and through-hole designs. Really, a lot of that magic is attributable to the designers of those circuits, not the type of components that they were working with. The maths work out the same, and the character of the sound is really, big picture, it's due to the circuit. And you can design incredible sounding circuits in surface mount that sound just as incredible as through-hole designs. And a lot of this debate is really sort of focusing on minutia that are not, it's not the core character of what you're hearing. So there's nothing about surface mount that precludes designing really great sounding circuits. And you'll find in like all of the super high-end audiophile gear out there, they're using surface mount, and they're getting skilled designers to make really great sounding designs using surface mount technology. It's really a non-issue sonically.
Yeah, and hey, we submit the Moog One as hopefully an example of being able to extract good sounds from surface mount.
I think once folks listen to it in person, they're not dealing with streaming audio encoding and things like that. The experience of hearing this thing through good monitors in person is really very convincing. It sounds amazing, and I don't think anybody in looking back on this from the future is going to have concerns about the sonic qualities of the surface mount components.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. What else should we go through here?
Well, let's see. We could talk about how the CVs interact with the analog voices. I know I see a CV question coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, we do see there is a CV question there.
Okay, well that's, all right. There's a very simple question
Okay.
asking if the CVIOs are compatible with Mother32, DFAM, and Eurorack more generally. Definitely they're compatible with all of the Moog modular family of instruments. The CV input-output range is -5 to +5 volts. Is there a 0 to 10 volts option, or is it -5?
No, it's unfortunately it's just -5 to 5.
Okay, so if you need a signal to be from 0 to 10 volts, you would need to do some level shifting. But if, anything in the 0 to 5 range, you can do -5 to 5. Almost all of the Moog stuff is -5 to 5 or 0 to 5. I think there's very little, if anything, that requires 0 to 10 within the Moog world. So the only conversion you might need to do would be for other Eurorack modules that specifically need 0 to 10 volt range. So you have a 10 volt range, you would just need to shift it coming out of the Moog One.
Hey, there's some sound.
Oh, accidental sound demo.
Yeah, actually the CV is an interesting thing to talk about in terms of the architecture. We had just talked about the expression engine.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's available in the expression engine as an input variable is the current voltage appearing on the CVs. So at any time, you can go to the voice and say, okay, use the voltage on CV1 as a modulator. And the way that works is that the CVs are constantly being sampled at actually at an audio rate. And those samples are distributed to all of the voice cards, and that happens constantly. And we can do that because the bus that we use internally is very high speed. Mm-hmm. So we can get those samples to all of the voice cards all at once, and then in the expression that you use to generate the modulations, you can use those CVs as sources. So,
yeah. So all of the voices can be voltage controlled at audio rate resolution from the CV inputs. And so you can have those changing any of the parameters that the voices have access to.
Well, maybe we should own up to the fact that the modulation happening on the voice cards themselves is not quite what we would normally consider audio rate.
Fair enough, yes. There are multiple different modulation paths internally within a voice. And some of the hardwired modulations are happening at that audio rate. FM, for example, all the dedicated, LFO2 to the filter, LFO3, I think, is that one also high speed? LFO3 to the wave? Okay. At any rate, there are certain, the modulation paths that we consider to be the most audio critical, which is basically frequency modulations and filter modulations. Those are happening at audio rate. The general purpose, you can modulate any source with any destination. Those modulations are happening at a slightly slower rate.
Yeah. There's basically 3 different modulation rates that are used within the system. And they're chosen because with a lower modulation rate, you can do more modulations. So for the kinds of modulations that, the rate doesn't matter as much, we do those, and that way you can have more of them. Mm-hmm. There's others that you do need to do at a higher rate. So for instance, the amplifier envelope is run at half audio rate. And that still allows you to get extremely fast attack times. One of the things that, in fact, the attacks are so fast, they've actually backed them off.
We had to make them slower because they were so fast that they were just creating a discontinuity in the signal that wasn't musically, it was like too fast to be musically useful. So we had to slow them down a little bit. I think the fastest envelope time now is 200 microseconds, which is still
it's
silly
still
fast.
pretty fast for most people.
That's
one of the traditional complaints about polyphonic analogs, justified or not, is that a lot of times the envelopes are too slow.
Well, certain ones in the 80s, they really, that was the first time they were using software envelopes, and they were running little 8-bit microprocessors that were, going at a very slow speed. And so I think it was the Matrix in particular.
The Matrix was
famously slow attacks, and that was just the best they could do at the time. And that is no longer an issue.
That's no longer an issue. It's definitely not an issue with this one. So we definitely wanted to make sure that especially the filter and the amplifier envelopes are getting modulated at a very high rate. So you get a nice natural sound and fast attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're very musical. And folks have been asking about the hardware inserts as well.
Yeah, so the hardware inserts, so I guess that could refer to one of 2 things, but I think probably that's talking about the TRS configuration.
Right, the
on
direct
output
outs,
jacks.
the one through 4, the
Yeah.
TRS jacks on the back.
So can we say where that feature actually came from? I think we can. That company is gone now. So.
Oh, well, by all means.
So that feature was inspired by the ARP Quadra, which brought out individual outputs, but they had these TRS inserts. So you could, just like on a TRS input on a mixing console or a compressor
or
or something
guitar
like
amp,
this,
yeah.
or sometimes a guitar amp. And well, we thought that was a really cool feature. It's very easy to do, so that's how these work as well. A signal comes out, but you can also return a signal using a TRS insert cable. And one of the things that allows you to do is you can take your favorite, say, guitar pedal, which is probably something from Moog, right?
Of course.
And you can put it on the ground, and you can have it be an effect, which you can basically call up from the front panel by routing the output through it. So this is something that gives hopefully a lot of flexibility and convenience.
So I'll go ahead and go over to the UI here, and this is the output matrix page of the UI. And you can see here we have assignments for the main left and right output, the sub left and right output, and then the 4 inserts. And each of those inserts, basically, you can select which synth is going to insert 1, which synth is going to insert 2, 3, and so on. And the idea here is that allows you to take a particular part of a multi-timbral sound, or if you've got a split sound, you can direct just one of those layers to a specific insert and do external analog processing to that synth sound, and then using the return. So people have asked, where is that insert in the signal path? Basically, yeah, which is an important thing to know. So you've got all of your voices within a synth. Those are mixed together. They go through the synth effect, if there is one. And then that is the point where the direct output is sent to that output jack. And the return from that insert is then summed with the main mix or the submix. So you have all of your internal processing, voices are mixed together, then that goes to your outboard analog processing, and then, of course you can continue to record that yourself directly as a separate signal path, or using the return of the insert jack, your post-processed signal is then summed with the master mix with your other synths that are not being externally processed, and that whole mix can come together in your stereo main or submix.
Yeah, so it almost, you can use it as a substitute for one of the internal digital effects.
That's
in the same way.
Yeah, and if you bypass that digital effect, then you have a 100% analog signal going out to your outboard effect, and so then you're free to do your own processing of any part or combination of the sounds that the synth is making using the direct outputs and the insert returns.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that kind of goes back to the instrument being designed basically like a mixing console. One of the objectives was to give people the kind of flexibility that they're more used to on kind of big digital workstations, but in an analog way.
Right,
so
or
a
like
lot
an
of the
8-bus console, yeah.
Like an 8-bus console. So a lot of the kind of routings and things that you would get out of a digital synthesizer, we're doing it in analog. We're doing it with switches and programmable amplifiers and all this kind of thing. So that's the kind of flexibility we wanted to give people without sacrificing that analog path.
Yeah, the master effects are on real analog. I mean, granted they're digital effects, but we have real analog send buses like you would have on your mixer. There's a
That's
send
right.
1 and a send 2 per channel, essentially, and those allow you to send a custom level of each of the synth parts to the effects buses.
Yeah, they work exactly like the aux sends on a mixing console, except that instead of pots on the channel, they are VCAs. So this is still being done in a very analog way. It's digital. The effect is digital, as Amos mentioned, but all the sending is done in analog.
Yep, done with voltage-controlled amplifiers onto physical copper wire send buses that all the voices are connected to.
That's right.
There's another question about a software editor. A lot of folks are interested to know if there will be a software editor for this synthesizer. As of now, from the conception of this instrument, the goal has been to make the UI fast, comprehensive, and easy to access enough that there was really nothing that nothing would require an editor. The goal is to make it so that everything that you need to do is as easy to do on this instrument as it would be in a separate editor software. And so for now, our goal is to continue, continue detailing out the UI, continue refining the user experience of the instrument itself, rather than dividing our efforts to develop a separate piece of software. Our total focus is on creating the most frictionless user experience with the hardware itself that we can, and making sure that it integrates seamlessly with your digital production environment to the extent where hopefully there's nothing missing. Nothing that you would need a software editor to accomplish. You can already do all of your preset management directly to Flash media. You get files that you can sort and organize on your computer. It doesn't use MIDI sysx to dump the presets, so there's no need. You don't have to interpret some arcane MIDI file format to get at your presets. They come out as basically human readable text data as a file on a USB drive. So that barrier has been removed. File management is extremely straightforward and simple, and preset editing is extremely straightforward and simple. It's graphical, it's textual. You have rich notes that you can write directly on the instrument. So for now, no editor, and the goal is to make sure that you don't miss one.
Yeah, that was actually a requirement during development, that the interface be so complete that you wouldn't require ever a computer editor.
That was a design requirement. You're right. Can you adjust the percentage mix of the hardware insert effect? I would say that has to be done on the hardware effect itself. I don't think, it really is an insert. It's a wire carrying your audio that goes out, and then a wire carrying your return audio that comes back in and is summed. So the short answer is no. Within the instrument itself, it's a real hardware insert. So if you want to control the wet-dry mix of your insert effect, you would need to do that on the insert effect itself. So in the case of like a simple chorus stomp box that might not have a wet-dry, I think it would just be on-off just like the stomp box itself is.
Yeah, and now there are level controls on the outputs of the inserts, so you can control the level going out of the jacks. So, but in terms of kind of a wet-dry, we can we can do that as much as would be needed in this situation.
Right.
But yeah, mostly we're expecting that whatever effect you plug in, it's either going to have a wet-dry or you'll just control the level going out.
Just thinking about that as you were speaking, I think you could even, if that was specifically the effect that you wanted to achieve, a wet-dry mix, and it was using an effect that was just fully on or off, you could probably fake it by putting the same timbre on two synths, having one be full wet with your effect and the other one dry, and then controlling the mix level of those two layers. Basically, you could create a layered sound within this instrument. There are so many facilities for mixing and combining signals and sounds that there's almost guaranteed to be a way to do whatever it is you're trying to do. And in this case, I would say create a layered sound with one dry layer and one fully wet layer that's going out to your external effect, and then blend those, blend the relative level of those layers in your master mix. That would work perfectly well.
That's right. And another thing that you can also do is, because you can control the level going out of the inserts, once you mix it back in, you've effectively got a wet-dry control if the synth is still coming out of the mains.
That's right. So
I think maybe we could say yes to that one. You can adjust the percentage. There's different ways to do it.
Yeah. There's a question, is the insert before or after stereo panning?
It is before.
Mm-hmm.
It is before. So we have, we have a somewhat limited number of VCAs, although we did put in quite a few. But yeah, the inserts are actually taken from the voice prior to panning into the main left-right bus. So that's
That's right.
That's the short answer there.
Although there are 4 inserts, and you can use pairs of inserts as stereo send returns. So like, for example, if you have signals plugged into both the inserts 1 and 2, then insert 1 is summed as the left main mix, insert 2 is summed as the right main mix. And so you can use a stereo effects processor that way. And again, you might have to do a little bit of fancy setup with a layered sound, you know, 1 layer panned left, 1 layer panned right, each of those sent to, one of those sent to insert 1, one of those sent to insert 2. And I'm pretty sure that that would work. I'm speculating at this point. I haven't tried that particular arrangement, but I'm sort of like imagining a block diagram in my head and thinking about how I would, you know, how I would send stereo voices out to a stereo effects processor and sum that back in. And again, you have enough channels and you have enough flexibility with those channels that it might not work automatically, but I think that's something that you could pretty easily set up, you know, with just a little bit of thought about how to use the facilities that you have available.
Yeah, that's how much flexibility there is. Not even we have tried out all the combinations that we could do with.
There are a lot, but yeah, you have 4 inserts that can be used together or separately. You have 2 stereo mix buses that you can return those signals to, and then you have panning per part and panning per voice, although the sends that come from the voice, basically each voice is a mono instrument that is then mixed into a stereo mix. So if you tap directly off the voice for an insert, there's no panning information associated with that particular signal. You'd have to then recreate that, or you know, put it within a stereo field when you mixed it back together, because the direct sends are of a mono voice.
That's right. They are pre-panning.
Yeah.
Let's see. Should we go for
The multi-drive question?
Yeah. Why did we decide not to include a multi-drive?
Okay. I guess this is the last question for a little while.
Right.
The main reason we decided not to include a multi-drive circuit is because of the historical challenge of mixing a multi-voice polyphonic synthesizer. One of the famous things about the memory Moog is that it dominates an entire mix. If you play a memory Moog chord, there's almost nothing you can do to tame it, to have it sit right with other instruments, etc. And the headroom, when you want one note of one voice to be powerful. People are going to play a single mono bass and want to compare it to a mini Moog. And so we wanted to make sure that one voice was a powerful sound, but at the same time, within the same instrument, we realized that we were going to be bussing together up to 16 voices into the same mix. And if you were to try to bus together 16 mini Moogs into one mix, you would have a hard time taming the signal, and this was the memory Moog problem. So multi-drive is a way of taking one voice and making it as huge and fat and dominating as possible. And we just decided with this instrument that we wanted to make sure that it could sound big and that it could sound rich, but that you weren't going to be able to just absolutely clobber the mix, run out of headroom, and get a big mess of a sound, which, in our own tests on the bench, we determined that adding the same kind of multi-drive circuit that the subs had, it just made for, too many mix issues, too many headroom issues. If you provide enough headroom so that 16 voices of multi-drive doesn't clip, that means that one voice is going to be very small by comparison. That's just, just the physics of how much energy you can fit into one signal dictated that we had to strike a balance between having one voice be pleasing and having 16 stacked voices be pleasing. And so we just made a choice aesthetically and logistically with voicing this instrument that multi-drive took the character too far in the direction of having a messy, hard-to-tame mix. And also, this is a different instrument than the sub-series, and so we thought it was okay and appropriate to let them each have their own character. So this has its own character that I think will become iconic over time, and the sub has its own character with the multi-drive, and they're different siblings in the same family.
Yeah, a lot of it really was an aesthetic choice.
Mm-hmm.
It was to give people kind of a different flavor, and we'd all experienced various instruments that have these multi-drive circuits, and there can be a real temptation to kind of overuse them, and they can really affect the sound of the instrument. So we wanted to do something that had a coherent sound, that really mixed well, that was a good polyphonic sound coming out of the instrument, and we didn't feel that the multi-drive really enhanced that too much.
Although we did voice the mixer so that you could hit the filters hard enough to get some overdrive in the signal. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't go too far in the other direction. So the mixer is voiced so that you can saturate the signal of the oscillators going into the filters and get some of that filter overload sound that is so iconic to the Moog sound. That is definitely in there. We just did that in the even older traditional way of the gain staging between, from the mixer into the filter into the final VCA, as opposed to adding a dedicated separate, drive pedal.
Yeah, and actually there's a couple other things even that we could talk about. This is a good question. We could talk about it for a while. But the other thing that we considered was, if you want that multi-drive sound, you've got the inserts on the back. So you can attach your own, drive kind of sound and get the sound that you want. So this is part of the reason that we didn't put in all of these kinds of things that we could have. The other thing to consider, though, is that anything that we add to the sound architecture in this instrument is multiplied by 8 or 16. So if we're not just adding one multi-drive circuit here like we would do on the Sub 37, we're actually adding 8 of them or 16 of them. And believe it or not, I mean, this is a kind of an upper tier price point instrument, but cost does matter after a while.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that we could have put in this thing that we actually didn't.
Try to keep it to the price point that it is.
Yeah, so it seems hard to believe. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here, but that was one of the things that...
If you want the sound of a Moog bass through a rat pedal, you can absolutely get that just by patching a literal rat pedal into the insert and running your bass synth sound through that. So all of those options are available.
One of the questions is, will you guys be running for president together in 2020?
Well, I think that that's under discussion.
We'll have to get our advisors back to you on that. But
we'll make available our donation structure and all that stuff at a later time. Yeah, and our platform. We'll have to come up with a platform.
It'll be a very synth-forward platform, I think.
It'll involve great sounds for this country, though. That's one of the main things we're going to really emphasize.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else? Should be all right.
All right.
I think we're done.
Thank you all very much.
Stick around or come back at 3, where we'll actually be playing some sounds on this instrument that we've been waving our hands over this morning.
We got out one note.
There was one note. Here, I'll play a second one. Oh, that was so. I almost wish I had it.
It was a nice one too. Here, let's do a major 7th.